Hello students. Today we have reached towards the end of the journey of Vistas. We are here on the 8th chapter. But before we move on, I'm sure you must have gone through all the videos of the previous chapters. Again, it's a request, keep watching them because the more you understand the chapter, you cannot memorize it. But the more you understand the chapter, the easier for you to write your answers, to frame your answers, to also answer the extracts. The understanding part is way more important. So it is very important, it is necessary that you go through the entire video because the entire story, all the stories, they have been explained to you line by line, word by word. So that makes it really easy. So let's move on towards the last chapter of Vistas, chapter 8, Memories of Childhood. Now in this you have two parts. The first part is The Cutting of My Long Hair by Zitkalasa. So let's move on and see what it holds for us. And yes, about the author, Zitkalasa, also known as Gertrude Simmons Bonnen, her missionary given name, was a Yankton, Dakota writer, musician, educator, and activist. Dakota, let me tell you, this is one of the states in the United States, right? So one of those. So she was from there. And Yankton was the first capital of Dakota. Her works chronicle her struggles with cultural identity and the pull between the culture she was educated within and her Dakota culture she was born and raised in. Now, she was born in Dakota, right? But she had studied elsewhere. Now, the problem came when she had to balance between the two. Now, she was raised, the culture that we are raised in, we tend to find it a little difficult to adopt another culture. You're raised in a lot of security with your parents around. There's no exposure the way it is when you head out somewhere to study for your further education. It becomes a little of a problem, and this is the problem she faces in this story. So yes, she is, her works chronicle as in they tell you about, it's that old thing which is connected, chronicle her struggles with cultural identity. Yeah, so she was struggling between the two, what she was born in and what she faced while she was doing her education. So that is the problem between the two. Yeah, so let's move on and see what it tells us. And here's the plot for you. The Cutting of My Long Hair is a story that showcases the discrimination faced by the Indians in the Western world. Initially, yes, we are all aware, we have done history, so we are all aware of all the discrimination that used to take place before. I'm sure it doesn't really exist now. Things have changed, over the time. The story describes how an Indian girl was forced to wear Western dresses and adopt Western customs and habits. Yes, you have grown up in the Indian culture, with the Indian culture where there is a lot of respect, there's a lot of, security, there's a lot of warmth. You're very secured out there. Yes, Indian culture is definitely very rich. See, these days, we are aware there's a lot of, that all of us have been influenced by the Western culture. But let me tell you, right now, if you actually analyze it, the Western culture is ready to adopt the Indian culture because they find it way more meaningful. Yes, it's true. If you see, they're all into yoga practices these days. Why? There's a lot of meditation happening. Why? Because there's a lot of hollowness there. They're all very empty. There's nothing like how today we stand, with great pride and, we are way happier than them. They are all empty. There you have all the diluted culture. Yeah. So we here are full of emotions. They are not. Lot of comparison, lot of things, which we are all aware of. But then, yeah, that's how the comparison comes, where the Indian culture is way more better, far more better than the Western culture. So yeah, moving further, the cutting of her hair by her school authorities in order to make her look like an American student signifies how people were forced to give up on their traditions due to a variety of factors. You grow up with different traditions. You tend to be very different, emotionally, mentally, physically. But then, due to certain factors, you have to change them over. And let's see what were the factors that forced her to do so. So, the first day in the land of apples was a bitter cold one, for the snow still covered the ground and the trees were bare. Now, what do we mean by the land of apples? What was called? It was Washington. Washington produced the highest amount of apples. It was the highest producer in the United States, and that's the reason it was called the land of apples. So yes, she was there. It was the first day in Washington. It was extremely cold out there, and the snow still covered the ground and the trees were bare. So it was winter time where it was totally covered with snow. The ground was covered with snow and the trees had no leaves. They were bare. A large bell rang for breakfast, its loud metallic voice crashing through the belfry overhead and into our sensitive ears. Now, it was her first day there, and so she's there for her education. So now she's talking about her experience there. A large bell rang for breakfast. Now, when you go to some places, if we go to hostels, we go for boarding. So you have a lot of discipline out there, right? And obviously you have to go and blend according to their culture. You have to go and blend into their system. So you have to adopt what they do. You cannot go with your own systems there. So this is her problem. Now she went there, and how difficultly she adopted to their culture. So this is the beginning. So first, a large bell rang for breakfast and its loud metallic voice crashing through the belfry. Can you see this? This is the belfry out here. See, it's given here, part of the tower to house a bell. You house a bell. So this is the belfry. So belfry overhead into our sensitive ears. Now the ears, they are easily affected by the noise. So it was so loud that it even affected the ears. The annoying clatter of shoes on bare floors gave us no peace. The annoying clatter, as in the continuous rattling sound. People running with their shoes, you have that rattling sound coming on bare floors, gave us no peace. There was so much of noise that it was disturbing. Can you see the way it has been framed? It gave us no peace. Please notice every word, every phrase, every vocabulary that is added to every chapter. It will definitely enhance your vocabulary and your communication skills. So while it's going on, please move across it and try framing new sentences. It will help you in your creative writing. Your writing skills will be far more sophisticated. Moving further, the constant clash of harsh noises with an undercurrent of many voices murmuring an unknown tongue. Undercurrent here is background. Okay, so the constant clash of harsh noises with the background of many voices murmuring an unknown tongue. What do you mean by an unknown tongue? They were talking a different language. Made a bedlam within which I was securely tied. It made a confusion. There was so much of confusion there that I didn't know, I couldn't understand what was happening. I was securely tied around that confusion, that it was all over me. And though my spirit tore itself in struggling for its lost freedom, all was useless. And though I tried my best, my spirit tore itself in struggling for the lost freedom. Obviously, the freedom was lost. Why? Because now she had to move according to what that school, what that university offered her. So she had to move. So she had lost her freedom, and she tried her level best to cope up with it. She was struggling with it, but all was useless. A pale-faced woman with white hair came up after us. Pale face as in a faced woman, very pale, where when you fall sick, how you look pale, there's literally no blood on your face. So that's the pale faced woman. She came with white hair, came up after us. We were placed in a line of girls who were marching into the dining room. Why were they going to the dining room? Remember, it was breakfast time. Yes? So they all made a line of girls and they had to march, they had to walk towards the dining room. These were Indian girls. All these were Indian girls in stiff shoes. Stiff shoes, as in here it gives an unpleasant feeling. It was something different. The shoes were really not, you were not that comfortable. And closely clinging dresses. Closely clinging, as in here they were very tight fitted dresses. They were very fitted dresses. The small girls wore sleeved aprons and shingled hair. Shingled hair as in short hair. We are pretty well versed with our Indian culture. We all tend to have long hair. We love long hair. Whereas the American culture says they all go for short hair, shingled hair, right? So yeah, these girls were all Indians. They were in uncomfortable shoes and tight dresses. They were not used to it. They were used to a different set of clothes. There they had to wear something different. As I walked noiselessly in my soft moccasins, you can see the moccasins out there. They are the shoes, with soft sole. The sole of the shoe is very soft. I felt like sinking to the floor, for my blanket had been stripped from my shoulders. Now, India, it's all about decent clothing. You don't expose your flesh. Whereas in the Western culture, it's all about exposing yourself totally. So here it was very different for her, that she felt like sinking to the floor. She was ashamed. She was totally ashamed, because we don't actually, leave our skins that bare. We don't expose the way they do. We are way decently dressed. Her blanket had been stripped. It had been removed from her shoulders. She was covering her, shoulders with the blanket, but then she felt ashamed because it was removed. I looked hard at the Indian girls who seemed not to care that they were even more immodestly dressed than I in their tightly fitting clothes. Well, when she came across other students as well who were Indians also, now they seemed not to care that they were even more indecently dressed. What she had worn was a little better than those who were totally indecently dressed in their tight fitting clothes. She was just wondering, how are they even managing it? While we marched in, the boys entered at an opposite door. We marched in, and from the opposite door the boys came in. So they had a separate line for girls and boys. I watched for the three young braves who came in our party. Now there were three of them, three of the students, three of the boys who came and joined us. I spied them in the rear ranks. I looked at them, with suspicious eyes. How you spy them. They were sitting in the back rows, looking as uncomfortable as I felt. Even they were equally uncomfortable, just the way I was. She was just expressing how uncomfortable she was with those clothes, with that atmosphere over there. A small bell was tapped, and each of the pupils drew a chair from under the table. Now, as soon as they went there was strict discipline. So first there was a bell. At the sound of the bell, they had to draw out the chair from under the table. Supposing this act meant they were to be seated, I pulled out mine and at once slipped into it from one side. Now, it was her first day. She was not aware. Everything was new for her. So what she thought was, at the tap of the bell, you're supposed to sit down. So what she quickly did was she removed, she drew out the chair from under the table and she quickly sat down. She slipped into it, she sat down. But when I turned my head, the moment as it is, she was very nervous, right? So when she turned around, I saw that I was the only one seated and all the rest at our table remained standing. Suddenly she realized that I'm the only one sitting and the rest all are standing. Just as I began to rise, just as I began to stand up, looking shyly around to see how chairs were to be used, a second bell was sounded. Now, she was nervous, she was scared, she's saying, oh my God, I did something wrong. So immediately she stood up and she looked shyly around that how is everyone using the chair. So that till she could understand that, the second bell rang, the second bell was sounded, all were seated at last. Now on the second bell, they were supposed to sit. And I had to crawl back into my chair again. She had already stood up until she could realize what was happening, how to, stand, how to keep the chair, how to use the chair. And quickly the second bell rang and she also sat down just like the others. I heard a man's voice at one end of the hall and I looked around to see him. Now there was this man, he was saying something, so I looked around to see where that voice was coming from, but all the others hung their heads over their plates. Now while I was looking around where that voice is coming, and the others were like this, so it was like sort of a prayer. So all were looking into their plates while she was looking around. She was the only one doing that. As I glanced at the long chain of tables, I caught the eyes of a pale-faced woman upon me. Now, while I was looking around, she glanced at the long chain of tables. There were many tables, right? There were chains of them. I caught the eyes of a pale face. I somehow felt that I was being stared upon. I was being looked upon. I saw the eyes of a pale-faced woman upon me. She was staring at me. Obviously, she was doing all wrong. She had to learn. So she was staring at her. Immediately, I dropped my eyes. I stopped looking at her and I started looking down, wondering why I was so keenly watched by the strange woman. She's saying, I was wondering why she's staring, why is she looking at me so intensely, for what reason? The man ceased his mutterings. He ceased his muttering as in he stopped talking. The man stopped mentioning, he stopped talking, and then a third bell was tapped. A third bell rang. Everyone picked up his knife and fork and began eating. So there were 3 bells. The first bell, draw out the chair. The second bell, you had to just stand with your eyes down and sit down, and the third bell, you had to start eating. So that was the bell procedure. So that was the system to be followed. I began crying instead, for by this time I was afraid to venture anything more. Now at that time, when she saw that lady looking at her, and she was overwhelmed, it was too much to take. So finally she started crying. And she was afraid to take in any more. She was afraid to try anything more new for herself. She said, "Bas, now that's enough. I took enough right from, it was her very first day and she had already found everything very strange. She was going wrong. She was nervous. She didn't know what to do. So all that made her cry out. She actually was crying. But this eating by formula was not the hardest trial in that first day. Now, it was her first day. She faced all this in the morning during breakfast, but that was not the only test. That was not the hardest. There was something more that came up for her. So that's what she said. Eating by formula. Formula as in, bell 1, bell 2, bell 3, that was the formula. It was not the hardest. There was something more for her. Late in the morning, my friend Judwin gave me a terrible warning. She warned me. She was a friend, so she warned me. Judwin knew a few words of English and she had overheard the pale-faced woman talk about cutting our long, heavy hair. Now her friend Judwin came to her and told her, something, that lady with the pale face who was actually staring at her all the time. So Judwin had overheard. She did not mean to hear it, but yeah, while she just overheard it. It was not something which she really meant to do. So she told her that lady was planning to cut our long, heavy hair. Our mothers had taught us that only unskilled warriors who were captured had their hair shingled by the enemy. Now the unskilled warriors who were not having enough skill and so to fight off, and so they were caught by the enemy, and their enemy would cut short their hair. Among our people, short hair was worn by mourners and shingled hair by cowards. She said, according to us, according to the Hindu culture, the short hair was worn by mourners. We know very well, God forbid, if there is a demise, if there is a death of the parents, the children generally become bald. They give their hair. Now that, I don't know if you're aware that why we give those hair, why the sons become bald, because you can never express your gratitude to your parents. Never. And your hair, just like they are countless, you cannot count them, so is the gratitude for the parents. So when, the parents pass away, when they, breathe their last, the children express their gratitude in this manner. So that is the reason we generally tend to become bald when the parents die. The sons, of course, generally do that. So the short hair was worn by mourners and shingled hair by cowards. Cowards, people lacking in courage, they don't have the courage to fight back. They make their hair really short. Otherwise, that's what the Indian culture taught her. That's what she was aware of and she was brought up by. Now, we discussed our fate, we discussed our destiny, our luck, some moments, and when Judwin said, we have to submit, we have to give up, we have to actually follow what they are doing because they are strong, I rebelled. Now, she was courageous enough. She was braver than Judwin. She was more courageous. And she said, Judwin tells her, look, we will have to submit, we will have to yield in. But I felt, the author herself, she says, that I rebelled, I opposed. I said, no, I am not giving up my hair. No ways. No, I will not submit. I will struggle first, I answered. Now she says, I will not give up easily. First, I will struggle. I will try my level best that it does not happen to me. Then let's see what happens. I watched my chance, and when no one noticed, I disappeared. Now what she did was, now she knew that they were going to be called or they were going to be taken to some place where they would get their hair cut short. So she was looking for a chance to disappear. She was looking for that chance, and when no one noticed, no one realized anything, she quickly disappeared. And where did she disappear? I crept up the stairs as quietly as I could in my squeaking shoes. She quickly went up the steps. She crawled, as in she went up the steps as quietly as I could in my squeaking shoes. Now shoes, when you go on that wooden thing, they make that squeaky noise. Short, high-pitched noises on the shoe. The titch, that noise comes. My moccasins had been exchanged for shoes. Now, she had moccasins which had the soft sole. That did not make the noise. But coincidentally, to her bad luck, the shoes had been exchanged. Her moccasins somebody else wore off, and she was wearing someone else's shoes, and the shoes made the noise. Along the hall I passed without knowing whither I was going. Now she was new to the place. She did not know which staircase went where, which hall, nothing. Wherever she could find, some place to escape, she just went off. So she did not know, without knowing where I was going, she just went up. Along the hall she passed. Turning aside to an open door, she just went there. She found a large room with 3 white beds in it. Now she just managed to get into a room where there were 3 beds. The windows were covered with dark green curtains which made the room very dim. Though it was morning time, immediately after breakfast, this whole scene was, there were dark green curtains all around the window, and so obviously there was very less light in the room. It was dim. It was pretty dark. You can see that. Thankful that no one was there, I directed my steps towards the corner farthest from the door. Now, fortunately, luckily, there was nobody in the room. There was absolutely nobody. She was all alone. So what she did was she turned towards the corner, which was very far from the door. She went into such a corner of that room so that anyone even who entered from the door would not be able to see her. On my hands and knees, I crawled under the bed. What she did was she went under the bed and huddled myself in the dark corner. How did she sit down? With her arms and legs very close to each other. You know, you sit up like this, you hide in one corner. She huddled herself up in the dark corner. It was dark because there were green curtains. From my hiding place, I peered out, shuddering with fear whenever I heard footsteps nearby. Now, where she was hiding, the hiding place, I peered out, as in I tried to see. She was trying to see from there, shuddering with fear. She was shivering. She was trembling with fear whenever I heard footsteps nearby. Now, whenever she could hear, you know, you come up the staircase, that noise comes. So every time she would hear those footsteps, she would get scared and she would try to see, is someone coming in the room? Though in the hall, loud voices were calling my name, and I knew that even Judwin was searching for me, I did not open my mouth to answer. Now everybody realized that she was missing. So everyone started looking for her. And of course, even her friend Judwin, she was calling out to her, you know, where are you, where are you? But she was quiet. She did not utter a word. Then the steps were quickened and the voices became excited. Now, we could hear many, you know, steps moving around looking for her. There was a lot of noise, commotion. The sounds came nearer and nearer. Everyone now, the sound, whatever the steps were coming, it started, sounding more louder and louder because she felt now they were all coming up. Women and girls entered the room. All the women and the girls, they all entered the room she was hiding in. I held my breath. I was quiet. I was not even breathing. And watched them upon closet doors and peep behind large trunks. They were literally opening the closet. The closet are the big wardrobes. You know, you can see a tall wardrobe. They opened that to see if I was hiding there. They also were peeping behind large trunks. Trunks were those large storage boxes, you know, with a hinged lid. So that's how they were trying to search me everywhere. Someone threw up the curtains, now those dark green curtains, someone even opened the curtains so that there is some light and they can see her, and the room was filled with sudden light. Obviously the curtains were open and so there was light in the room which was so full of darkness. What caused them to stoop and look under the bed, I do not know. He's saying what? She said what made them do it, I don't understand. They looked under the bed. Now obviously when you're searching for somebody who has been somewhere around, who is somewhere around, so you tend to look at these common places where a person can hide. So obviously under the bed is a very common place. So some of them looked under the bed. I remember being dragged out, though I resisted by kicking and scratching wildly. He says, I remember they pulled me out. I tried to fight. I tried to just, kick them away and even scratch them wildly. I did everything I could so that they could leave me, but it wasn't the case. In spite of myself, I was carried downstairs and tied fast in a chair. Now, obviously, she was taken downstairs and she was tied up to a chair. I cried aloud, shaking my head all the while until I felt the cold blades of the scissors against my neck and I heard them gnaw off one of my thick braids, the thick braids. She had no choice, but she had to give up. You remember she had said, first I will struggle, I will try, that this does not happen to me. Then she felt helpless and obviously she could do nothing. So yes, she tried a lot, she shook her head. Then suddenly she felt, when your hair is cut, you can feel the blade of the scissor on your neck, right? And she felt those cold blades of the scissor, and first they cut off her, one of her thick braids. She was wearing two plaits probably. So they cut off the first one, right? And then I lost my spirit. I gave up. I couldn't fight. I couldn't do anything about it then. Since the day I was taken from my mother, I had suffered extreme indignities. She says, I as a child was very secured in my mother's warmth. I was very much safe out there. But from the day I was taken away from her, I went far from her. All that I faced were humiliations and insults, indignities. People had stared at me. I had been tossed about in the air like a wooden puppet. He said I had been tossed about as in I had been thrown into the air like a wooden puppet. And now my long hair was shingled like a coward's. She says now my long hair was actually cut short like a coward. I could not fight it. So now it shows that I have become a coward myself. So you see how much secured you are when you are with your parents, right? This age is such, I'm sure right now you're looking for space. I want my space is what everybody says. I want my freedom. Don't interfere in my life. These are the very common words at this point of time that you generally feel. But let me tell you, it is definitely not really going to, let you feel good about it in the long time. Right now, what you are talking about, the space, is all about the Western culture. But when you stay in the umbrella of your parents, you are well protected from all the problems in life. Yes, definitely experience it. I am not just telling you. So, in my anguish, I moaned for my mother, in the pain, in the grief, in the sadness. When I was going through that, I moaned, I called out in a low, painful voice for my mother, but no one came to comfort me. And that's how generally we, whenever there's anything wrong happening, the first thing that comes, you think of your mom. I mean, more than your dad, it's a general thing. We generally think of our mothers at this point of time. So it's a very close connect. It shows that emotional connect, with your mothers. Not a soul reasoned quietly with me as my own mother used to do. Nobody actually even sat and spoke to me peacefully. My mother would come, she would talk, she would ask me my problems, she would give me solutions. She would make sure that I am not in pain, I am not in tension. But here, there was nobody to whom I could discuss my problems with. Nobody who could give me solutions. My mother is my troubleshooter. So she says here, I could not find my mother. For now, I was only one of the many little animals driven by a herder. Herder is the one who keeps animals. So she felt like an animal now. She felt like an animal, and all the authorities, she felt like they were owning them. They were ruling over them. And she felt I was one among those many. There were so many other students as well. And I was one among them who was being, authorized, who was being taken care of, rather, should I say, or ruled upon by the authorities. She now felt she was being controlled by someone. Her own freedom was totally gone. Why? Because now, just like an animal, is being controlled by the herder, she felt the same. She said, now my control, my remote control is in someone else's hands. The way they tell me, I will have to keep switching channels. In the sense, I will have to do exactly what they want me to do. So it was the end of her freedom, just like we are at the end of the chapter. Now this quote, which you are going to listen to just now, is very meaningful and very apt as per the chapter. Let's listen to it and just tell me, what do you feel out of it? Color is what gives jewels their worth. They light up and enhance the face. Nothing is more elegant than a black skirt and sweater worn with a sparkling, multi-stoned necklace. A very good quote by Christian Dior. What do you think this color is telling you? What does it actually mean to you? Color is what gives jewels their worth. It is the inner color. It is the color inside it which actually enhances it. Just like the way our character, our culture enhances us. Yes, very true. The culture that you have within you, that actually enhances your dignity. It actually dignifies your personality. It's not about, if you wear Western clothes, or if you, you move according to them, you eat according to them. That's not actually what gives you the grace. Your graceful personality is what is inside you, and this is what she lost. This is what the author lost, her freedom and all her grace, because she could not shine with it. So yes, this is the end of part 1, and soon you shall be watching part 2 of Memories of Childhood. So yes, keep watching and keep learning.